Honda engine and the transmission have now found each other and are coupled back together. Just getting ready now to put the engine and tran back into the car. For those of you who have never done this before, put the engine and transmission together outside of the car, then drop it in. Don't try doing it in the car, it is way more difficult. Not that you couldn't do it in the car, but doing it this way is way easier, doing it out of the car, then dropping it in. While the engine's out of the car, I wanted to point out a few oddball things that Honda did back in the day. I realize this is an older engine. Honda was still doing a lot of research and development when they were building this. One thing I noticed is, as you can see, the intake manifold here and the exhaust manifold are directly on top of each other, which means the intake and exhaust ports are right next to each other. This is okay. There's not that there's anything wrong with this. This sort of design has been done on American engines and other cars for a long time. I just found it kind of quirky to find this on a Honda, and found it kind of odd that they would do this when there was so much room on the other side of the engine. The exhaust manifold is actually physically bolted to the intake manifold, and there was so much heat generated because of this, they actually had to have a coolant tube coming into the intake manifold in order to cool it down just from the heat rising into the intake. Right under here, there is like a heat baffle to prevent excessive amounts of heat from transferring in, but obviously they needed to add this. And so instead of having a dry intake manifold, they actually have a wet intake manifold. They could have just as easily put the exhaust manifold on the other side of the engine. I'm not sure why Honda did this, but it's just the way it was done. And because of the way they set it up, you have a really odd thing that I've never seen before. See this bolt? It actually holds the intake and the exhaust. So it's split right here. So when you assemble, you've actually got one nut holding both manifolds. And this is not the only one. There are others underneath here, way underneath, that do the exact same thing. Now, some nuts will actually hold on just an intake or just the exhaust, but they have some that are split like this. Very strange. I've never seen that before. Something I wanted to show you guys before the engine was back in the car is if you need to remove or install the intake manifold or exhaust manifold, or both, at any time on one of these older engines, most of the time you would actually have to remove the intake and exhaust together because of these split nuts. So a lot of these nuts are actually really, really difficult to get to. They're right up and underneath. You can't even see them. So a little tech tip for you. If you want to remove the intake and exhaust, you actually first remove this tube. Now this tube is the water coolant tube that comes right off the water pump. Here's a water pump here. And the water flows through this tube, goes behind the exhaust manifold, and comes out here. So I found by removing this tube, you can get to the little hidden nuts that are way up and underneath here that are otherwise impossible to get to. Get this out of your way and it's possible. In order to remove this tube, it is actually really simple. See this bolt right here? This one here. Take that off. Then just remove the hosing clamps, pull off a few hoses, and just grab this tube, use a lever, screwdriver, something like that, and the tube will just pop out. Will literally pop out from the back of the water pump housing. So you don't have to undo the water pump. You can leave the water pump right where it is, pop the tube out, and inside is just a little O-ring. So when you put it back in, make sure you put on a new O-ring. A little bit of Vaseline, put it on the O-ring, it'll pop right back in. So it's so simple, but you have to remove this bolt first. Otherwise, it is possible to pull the intake and the exhaust on one of these engines. It's just such a pain when the two of them are bolted together, and they're actually physically bolted together. See these nuts here? This bolt actually goes straight through and into the exhaust, on straight through the intake manifold. This is just bonkers stuff to me. I'm kind of used to the American stuff where they would never do something like this. I just found it kind of strange to have a design like this on a Honda, who is the world's biggest, best engine manufacturer. I notice on a lot of newer Hondas, the exhaust will actually be on the other side of the engine. So you wouldn't have to worry about this. This is just for the older stuff. And here we have the engine bay, all painted, rewired, and ready for the engine and transmission to be reinstalled. When I think about it, this project originally started off as just me trying to figure out what was wrong with the engine. The engine was running on 3 cylinders, and if you've ever heard a 4-cylinder running on 3 cylinders, you know what I'm talking about. It runs like a steaming pile. But it was running. So I decided, well, let's pull the head and get that done. And then I figured, well, you know, since I have the head off, maybe I'll pull the rest of the engine, and maybe I'll just pull the transmission, and, well, it snowballs from there, and this is where you wind up. You end up doing everything. One thing leads to another. It's the mentality of, well, I'm here, I might as well just do this. Oh, well, I'm already got all this apart, I might as well do that. And I've got all this other stuff apart, so I might as well do this. And this is what you wind up with. The whole damn thing torn out, ripped apart. This engine has been completely stripped down to block and cleaned, painted, ball honed, new rings, bearings, seals, head has been completely fresh. Everything has been done to this damn thing. It's a brand new 1983 Honda 1500. Just amazing how things can snowball out of control. All things considered, I'm pretty happy with how the engine bay came out. I repainted these areas, and that area that was all rusty and rotten, had a big rust hole in it, had been repaired. Now the paint I used, what I actually did was I went into a body shop, a professional paint shop, and had them mix some paint for me, and had them put it in a spray can. I took in a piece of the car, the gas door, and I had them match it to that particular color because there was no actual paint code. This car is a little too old. I could not find the paint code. So I just simply had them match it to the original paint. And honestly, I think they did a pretty good job. That's a pretty good match. When I first started spraying this, I thought, oh, that color's too bright. It doesn't match. It's nowhere close. I thought, oh, well, I'm just going to go with it anyways. Because when I'm done, the battery goes here, a bunch of stuff goes here. You're never going to see any of this. It's all going to be covered up. So I wasn't too worried about it. As long as it was silver-ish, no one's ever going to see. But now that it's dried, and I'm actually seeing it's a pretty damn good match. When you consider this is original paint over here. This is 1982 Honda. This was sprayed in Japan in 82. This car's an 83 year model, so built in Japan, 1982. This is spray can, last week, Canada. So, all things considered, not a bad match. And considering this is over 30 years old, this has been exposed to road grime and oxidization and oil and chemicals and God knows what. And this is fresh. Of course this is going to be brighter, more shiny, more bright, more of a vibrant silver. And all of this is original 82 and cleaned it up as best I could. Pretty damn good match. So it is well worth it going into a paint shop, take a gas door, a hinge, anything where they can match the color, and simply have them match the paint up. And this is a one-step process, so it wasn't base clear, this was enamel, which is exactly what the car originally was painted with, just a basic enamel. Back in the day, cars were not really shiny the way they are now. Nowadays, paint looks like it's wet when it's still dry. This paint was very obviously dry, it was almost flat. Bit of a sheen to it, not much. Which is exactly what I wanted over here. Little bit of a sheen. This may appear a little brighter silver. This is fresh paint. That is 30 years old. Overall, I'm pretty impressed. So this was a good experiment. This is the first time I've ever done this. And they just simply fill a paint can. It cost me 23 bucks, which is a lot of money for a paint can, but I'm impressed with the results. And I was able to go over things that even Honda from the factory had missed. I found a few areas underneath where even the factory had sprayed primer, but yet never painted. I guess they figured no one's ever going to see it, who cares, it simply got missed. Back in the day, cars were painted by some dude in Japan in a spacesuit, and he'd just be spraying away. It's not like today where it's all done by robotics and computers, where everything is programmed to paint a certain way, everything comes out the exact same perfectly every time. This was just some guy. Something I noticed too, see these paint runs? That's not me. That is 1982 Japan Honda. I noticed a few paint runs. And that's just something Honda left from the factory. And I just left it there. I didn't bother fixing it. I'm assuming Honda simply figured when they saw these runs, they just thought, nah, no one's ever going to notice. The exterior of the car doesn't have any runs. That's all they were really worried about. Who really cares under the hood? The only one that's ever going to see it is a Honda tech. By the time anybody notices, car is going to be completely out of warranty, so they're not too concerned about it. And they were right. That was sprayed in 1982, and it took until 2019 for anybody to notice. So, yeah, they got away with it. I just thought it was kind of a neat little quirky thing that even the Japanese occasionally make a mistake. But I'm going to leave it there. I think that's cute.